Hello and welcome back to a brand new Realm News episode. I am your host, the Dark Lord, the one who puts the real in Realm and expands your mind one block at a time. I hope that your week has been going great so far. If not, maybe this episode will cheer you right up. We have exited October and left our Halloween-themed month behind. We are now in the holiday season with Thanksgiving approaching fast here in the United States. And then Christmas is just right around the corner. I picked a good episode for the beginning of November, I think. It's sweater weather, hot chocolate, and time for soups and stews. And that is exactly what I'm going to cover today. We will be looking back in history to see the origin of stew and the evolution of it. I will then be connecting real-world stew to Minecraft stew in the Realm segment of the show. I will tell you all about the suspicious stew, mushroom stew, rabbit stew, and beetroot soup. So put your bib on over that awesome sweater, grab that hot chocolate, and find a nice cozy place to listen to Realm News' Soups and Stews. If you can't find a cozy place because you are working or occupied, then imagine that you are in a cozy place. Now let's get this show started, folks. It's poll time! Welcome to Poll Time, where I pose a question to the Minecraft community and get feedback from them to report back to you. This week's poll could be said to be related to the week's topic, albeit loosely related. Perhaps you eat stew in these places. But that is about the only thing related to this question of which biome is the hardest to build a village on. And I presented 4 of the harshest overworld biomes I could think of, which were the swamp biome, desert biome, snow-capped peaks biome, and the badlands biome. Now, these are truly harsh biomes. If you are a long-term listener, then you have heard me cover a couple of these dangerous biomes that I just listed off. I made a snow biome episode, a desert episode, and badlands. I think the swamp biome is going to be an upcoming episode in the near future. The swamp biome is a true harsh biome. This week's poll garnered 33 votes. It makes me so happy to see people show up for these polls. But I must tell you that I have no comments to read off for this week. I guess no one had anything to say. If you want to partake in these weekly polls, I always or typically post a new poll on Saturday on the Realm News subreddit page. You can find that at bio.link/Realm News. So today, you will hear my opinions on why the results turned out how they did. Let's read off the results, starting with the loser. It was my third biome that I made an episode over, and that was the desert. Yes, the desert was a loser in this week's poll, with a total of 2 votes. Now, why would the desert have 2 votes? That is the question I asked myself after seeing this result. The desert is a very difficult biome to survive in. Husks are the staple mob here, and as you probably all know, they do not burn in the sunlight. It is quite easy to get caught off guard by a husk in the desert. I've been attacked by the husk while building structures out there, and their hunger effect is devastating, especially in a place that is essentially void of food besides for the rabbit. Now moving on to the next biome. With 3 votes, just beating the desert by 1 vote is the Badlands, probably the most colorful overworld biome. The Badlands is composed of the most beautiful bands of stratified color, which is seen throughout the hoodoos, which compose the landscape of these places. This biome is rich in gold and in hostile mobs. It is a place that lacks trees or animals for sustenance. It is a harsh biome, However, it's not the harshest. Allow me to explain. The Badlands does have a sub-biome called the Wooded Badlands. They sit atop the eroded mesas, and you will have to climb a high elevation to access it. But once you do reach the top and access the Wooded Badlands, you will have plenty of wood to chop, and passive mobs hang around there as well. Also, I have noticed in my Badlands that you do not have to go far to find a river. But I must say that it depends if you are just trying to survive on the edge of the Badlands, near the water, or trekking through the interior of the Badlands. My brother, the Sun King, and I attempted to make a trek across one of my Badland biomes. We trekked for 2 Minecraft weeks, setting up rudimentary forts in hills and digging holes for shelter along the way. We gave up our trek because we ran out of resources and food. We never did find the end to that specific Badlands biome. I just remember it appearing to be just never ending. If you find yourself in the middle of the Badlands and you run out of food, you could easily die. That is why I added this biome to the list. But like I said, you can find mobs to eat in the Badlands and wood. It's somewhat rare, but it's possible. Now, moving on to the next biome with 7 votes. It's the inundated swamp biome. Now, this is a biome I plan on making an episode over one day. I covered the hostile mob, the bogged, in an episode, but the swamp biome deserves much more explanation. I put it on this list of dangerous biomes because there is danger around every corner. First off, let's talk about navigating it. It is difficult to navigate a swamp on foot or in boat. I highly recommend carrying a boat on you due to all the waterways that weave in and out throughout this landscape. While boating, you should leave torches out like, Hansel and Gretel, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. I find this to be a great method for finding your way back out to safety. Also, the swamps with their tall mangrove trees block out a lot of the sunlight. And torches help guide. With that lack of sunlight, they're even more pronounced, the torch lights along the banks or the trees that you're leaving those on, which helps guide you back out to safety. Also, this lack of sunlight, it allows mobs to easily generate underneath the trees. And don't forget that there is a new hostile mob lurking in on these muddy banks and the murky waters. The Bogged. The Bogged is a formidable foe. One hit from his poison-tipped arrow and your health will deplete down to near death. This biome, because of all the water and the onslaught of hostile mobs, makes this place extremely dangerous to build a village. My personal opinion is that this should have been maybe second place in the poll, just because of how dangerous it is. Yes, there's wood and passive mobs for eating, but the terrain is a nightmare and is absolutely treacherous. Also, witches live in their huts here. And as you all know from last week's episode, the witch is a formidable foe. So always be on your guard if attempting to build a village here. At least there are dirt blocks to grow crops on out here, unlike the Badlands and the desert biome. So at least there's that. Now, there is one more biome that we need to cover before wrapping up this week's poll time. That would be the snow-capped peaks, the winner of the poll, with 21 votes. And I can see why this won. In fact, I voted for this biome. I have had the hardest time building a thriving city in snow biomes. I could not even imagine the snow-capped peaks. It would be difficult to get a village built and started out in this place. First off, you would have to make a rail and minecart them up the mountain to your pre-constructed town. Then you would face challenges starting crops there, unless you had planted them inside a shelter, which I recommend. I have one town that I attempted to grow them outside, like my crops outside, with a huge roof over them, and it was a pain. You have to clear the snow on the ground and then plant them. And remember, you just can't grow crops out in the open in snow biomes, hence the roof I put over it. The snowfall will kill crops. Also, the Bogged has a cousin that lives out in these parts called the Stray. And when the stray hits you with its arrows of slowness, it will damage you and cause you to move slow. If you can manage to deal with the strays, then you will have to also deal with the snow. I say deal with the snow because the snow stacks. And if it stacks high enough, strays and other mobs can then jump over your village walls and attack the community. They'll just pour over. I recommend that you build the village walls up high out in this biome. The strays, the snow, and the elevation of the snow-capped peaks truly make this biome a formidable challenge to build a village on. Write in and let me know what you all think. If you are listening to this on Spotify, then you can also leave a comment right there after listening to this episode. With that said, I would like to wrap up poll time and move us on to the reel of the show. Let's go talk about stew. Welcome to The Reel, my friends, where we step out of the realm of Minecraft for a moment and visit the real world, where I will be linking the history of stew with stew in Minecraft to deepen your gaming experience. Before I started to research this topic, I had no idea that stew had such a rich, hearty history. Honestly, it made my head spin just how rooted this dish is in history. Heck, the name itself, stew, has a very intriguing origin story. Allow me to explain how stew got its name. I found an amazing website called tastingtable.com. The article is The Husky History of How Stew Got Its Name by Elias Nash, published on July 26, 2022. You would not think that stew would have anything husky about it. That is what I thought at first as well. The word first emerged around the 14th century in Old French. The word they used in Old French was esteuve, which in English refers to a cauldron, stove, or a heated room. The word esteuve has its origins in Latin, which makes perfect sense because French is a Latin-based language. Esteuve came from the Latin word extufare, meaning to evaporate. This article goes on to explain that extufare was a borrowed word. It came from the Greek word typhos, which means smoke. But it was the 14th century Old French word esteuve that became known for its lewdness. Esteuve, being associated with a heated room, soon became a term for bathhouse or a brothel. That's where the riskiness lies. Which is not too risque in my opinion, but it was sure fascinating to read and to learn. The word stew was also referred to as a person that was drunk before it was ever associated with being a meal. Now that we know where the name stew comes from, let's find out the history of the dish itself. Stew can be traced a long ways back in history. The first written evidence of stew came in the form of a 4,000-year-old recipe that instructed the cook how to make lamb stew. It was discovered written on an ancient tablet. The language was cuneiform. It comes from the Babylonian Empire and is considered one of the oldest recipes ever discovered in history. This recipe included several very recognizable ingredients that you would know, such as barley cakes, garlic, and leeks. Don't forget the lamb. However, this recipe did not have the proportions for the ingredients. It was a do-it-yourself type recipe. They just provide the scaffolding. The rest was up to you. However, there are scientists out there whose job it is to figure out these recipes by trial and error. Now, wouldn't that just be an awesome profession? Moving on, another article found at tastingtable.com titled The History of Beef Stew Can Be Traced Back to 14th Century France, written by Nikita Efanov, May 4th, 2024. The French, again, are responsible for another culinary delight that has been around for hundreds of years, that being beef stew. However, the French were not the first to make stew. People throughout the world have been slow cooking meat for centuries in all sorts of liquids. The Romans would cook beef in wine, raisins, and an assortment of spices. This dish has a specific name called Capadia. The Vikings had a dish as well that stewed meats. It was called scouse, and it consisted of a meat. Didn't matter what type of meat, they threw in what was on hand back then. Besides the meat, it also incorporated beans and ground bark. Yum, yum. All combined in some hot water that was cooked over coals. These two recipes sound very just interesting to me. I will leave a couple links in the show description so you can cook this at home for yourself. I may have to try them out myself and eat like a Viking or a Roman this winter. Now moving on. The French have been cooking beef stew for centuries. However, they did not call it stew. Instead, this was called ragout, which ragout was a little thinner sauced compared to our modern day stew as we know it. It was extremely popular amongst the peasants during the time because you could pretty much throw in anything into the clay pot and let it simmer in liquid for a few hours and then have a meal for the entire family. Meat was rarely incorporated in the ragouts made by peasants of the 14th century since it was not affordable to them. But occasionally they would throw in beef if it was available. Beef and other meat stews were primarily a delight only afforded by the rich. The peasants' ragout would primarily be made from root vegetables such as potatoes, leeks, celery, carrots, and whatever else was laying around the kitchen or in the garden. But if they did have meat, it was usually very tough meat, probably been laying around for a few days, and they would throw that in the stew, and stew was great for breaking that meat down over hours of, stewing in the liquids and really making it tender and digestible and palatable for the person. So that's why it was so appealing for peasants during this time. Now, I'd like to move on. A famous French chef that was employed to the royal court made ragout famous in France, forever linking stew with this country. His name is Taillevent. Encyclopedia.com goes on to say that Taillevent, or Guillaume Tirel, which was his real name, was born in 1315 and lived until 1395 CE. He is considered France's first master chef and the first celebrity chef in history of France. He wrote a very famous cookbook that had all sorts of recipes in it, including how to make soups and stews, or les potages, I should say, since this is a French cookbook. And the name of this book was Le Viandier, and it shaped how French cuisine is today. This book remained popular for well over 100 years and was the first cookbook to be printed in France. And because that was the premier cookbook in France, it pretty much made his recipes the golden standard to work off of. And that is one reason why beef stew became associated with the French. I found his cookbook on Gutenberg.org. I'll leave the link to it in the episode description. It's just brimming full of medieval French recipes. I translated a few of the stew recipes, and they were just very unique. Some of the methods seemed very obscure to me, but I am no chef. I am sure that it tasted great for the time period, though, but I don't know. It's just, they had some unusual ways. Like I read in part of the recipe that they would take, I think, a bread and soak it in water to make like a bread water as part of the recipe for a stew as a thickening agent, which I'm sure people still do today, but I thought that was interesting because you don't hear that being used too often. You know what I mean? Anyways, I just thought that was interesting. Go check that out in the show description link, and you can find a recipe from Taillevent Le Viandier's book that I translated and put on my Reddit. So go check that out if you're into medieval cooking or if you like to cook. It's just really interesting, or I find that type of stuff interesting, so I thought maybe you all would as well. Now, I'd like to move on here. It's worth mentioning this before moving on into the realm of the show, that the distinction between soup and stew is rather simple. In fact, I will not even elaborate on it in this show. I thought it would be a much more, there'd be a lot to talk about. Maybe a lot in the culinary area online would have a lot to say between soup and stew. But no, I didn't really see much argument or anything. it seemed like it all distilled down to one thing, and that is, it's just the liquid of it, just how thick or thin it is. That's all that separates the two entities. Soup has much more liquid in it than stew. You can sip it pretty much. It's much brothier, making it more thin and watery textured. It also takes less time to cook in a pot compared to stew. Soup does. And stew, on the other hand, consists of a very thick liquid, almost to the point of gravy. I hesitate using the word gravy, but I'm just using it as a descriptor. It's a very thick, pasty type of liquid, and it takes many more hours for a stew to cook than a soup. With that said, that wraps up what I have on stew today. I'll leave one of the stew recipes translated from the royal chef Taillevent's book Le Viandier on my Reddit, as I said, which you can find at Realm News' Reddit at bio.link/realmnews. Now, let's move on to the realm, my friends, and find out how to craft our own stews and soup in the overworld. Welcome back to the realm. This week we are in my royal palace called Lord's Landing, which overlooks the island of Lemnos and is part of the Yellow Coast province. Now, I do not have a royal chef named Taillevent in my palace, so I shall be your overworld chef today, Chef Dark Lord. I will be telling you all how to craft rabbit stew, beetroot soup, mushroom stew, and suspicious stew, along with their nutritional values and other uses. Allow me to start off with rabbit stew. Rabbit stew is a dish that I really had no clue about. I knew that we could craft it, but I never had before. Just simply not. Let's examine its history in the overworld. We first hear about rabbit stew from a former game developer named Ryan Holtz, who tweeted on June 30th, 2014, quote, "Cooked rabbit plus carrot plus baked potato plus mushroom plus bowl restores 10 points or 5 bars of hunger. Best other than golden apples," end quote. But that was not an accurate statement, because golden apples restores 4 ham shanks of hunger points, and not 5 as stated. Perhaps the golden apple did provide 10 hunger points back then. I'm just not aware of that. But the recipe in this tweet is correct. To craft rabbit stew, you need to go to a crafting table and add 1 cooked rabbit, 1 carrot, and 1 baked potato, and a red or brown mushroom with a wooden bowl. This will produce 1 bowl of rabbit stew, which is a heartier meal than a golden apple. So save that gold and bring rabbit stew along with you, because it will restore your hunger points by 10, which equals 5 ham shanks, 1 more ham shank than a golden apple. Also, rabbit stew is capable of delivering enough food to regenerate 5 hearts. That is, again, 1 more heart than a golden apple can restore, but less than eating a full cake, as it turns out. Remember from our baking episode, pumpkin pie, cookies, and cakes? A full cake will restore your hunger by 14 points. But rabbit stew is great for gaining not only hunger points, but also a bunch of saturation points. If you eat a bowl of rabbit stew, then it will reward you with 12 hunger saturation points. You can even feed rabbit stew to your pet wolf. They love this stuff. However, you cannot breed wolves with rabbit stew, but you can heal them with it, only if their health bar is not full. If you are unable to acquire the ingredients for crafting this stew, don't worry, you can trade for it with a villager. If you happen to have a novice butcher in one of your villages, you can then trade with them for rabbit stew. It costs 1 emerald for 1 bowl of rabbit stew. Before we move on to beetroot soup, I would like to tell you an interesting fact found on Minecraft.wiki. If you were to eat all the ingredients that is used to make rabbit stew, 1 by 1, It would yield you more hunger points and hunger saturation points than eating the rabbit stew itself. I shall quote Minecraft.wiki. Quote, if the ingredients of rabbit stew were eaten separately and the mushroom had become half of a mushroom stew, they would restore a total of 16 and 19.2 saturation points. Without counting the mushroom, the separate ingredients would restore 13 and 15.6 saturation points. 13 health and then 15.6 saturation points, I think is what they meant. End quote. But the reason for not doing this is that it would take you quite a while to ingest all 4 of those ingredients. And it would take up 4 inventory slots compared to 1 bowl of rabbit stew. Rabbit stew was officially put into Minecraft in Snapshot 14W27A. Java Update 1.8 on July 2nd, 2014. And my craftians have been enjoying this warm, healthy meal for over a decade. That wraps up rabbit stew. I would like to now move us on to the only soup in the game, beetroot soup. The history of beetroot soup is rather interesting to me. Beetroots first made their debut in a tweet made on November 11th, 2013 by Johan Bernhardsson, a former game developer for Mojang. I'll leave the link for you all to see at the Realm News subreddit. It's a cool pic. It shows from a first-person view the Minecraft character's hand holding a bowl of beetroot soup in front of a small garden of beets growing near water. Beetroots and beetroot soup was made official on December 12, 2013 in version 0.8.0 alpha for Pocket Edition, which this was rather shocking to me. When I saw this in Minecraft.wiki's history page, I thought I was not reading or looking at correctly at first because I'm used to seeing Java listed first, then Bedrock, then Pocket Edition, in that order on the history pages of Minecraft.wiki. But it appears that the beet crop and beetroot stew came to Pocket Edition first, then made its transition to Bedrock next. On March 19th, 2019, in Update 1.10.0, quote-unquote Village and Pillage Update, 6 years after its release on Pocket Edition. I wonder why it took so long to get that put into the larger game. I don't know, that just seems strange to me. Now let's move on to the nutritional value of beetroot soup and how to craft it. To make beetroot soup, it only takes 6 beetroots and 1 empty bowl. This will yield 1 bowl of beetroot soup, and once you eat this simple soup, it will restore 6 hunger points, or 3 ham shanks, and will also provide you with 7.2 hunger saturation points. This is the same nutritional value as mushroom stew and cooked chicken. Besides making beetroot soup yourself, you may have the slim chance of finding it, beetroot soup in a snowy house chest. Yes, that's correct. You could find this in a snowy house chest. There's a 9.9% chance that when you come across one of those picturesque snow biome villages in the middle of nowhere and you start to scour through all their chests for loot, you know you do. You may find this soup. It would be a welcoming meal to have in such a frigid place. Makes sense that the villagers eat this here. Now let's talk about mushroom stew. Mushroom stew is an incredibly old dish in Minecraft. It was quite shocking to see when it was first introduced. It first appeared on January 30th, 2010 as part of the InDev.31 number 20-100-130. I told you all that because this was part of a really pivotal time for the game of Minecraft. This InDev, or in development phase, was part of 26 different versions that were made in a month and a half. In the same version, the crafting table was added, which I thought was incredibly remarkable to learn because the crafting table is iconic in Minecraft and the most essential block in the game, in my opinion. I will be doing an episode over that too one day, the crafting table. Moving on. During this time, mushroom stew, people. I'm sorry for that. During this time, mushroom stew was capable of restoring 8 hunger points, which is a lot more than what it provides you currently. A bowl of mushroom stew will provide you 6 health points these days and 7.2 saturation points, which is not bad, the same as beetroot soup, remember? It is also a very easy bowl of stew to craft. It only requires 1 brown mushroom and 1 red mushroom and an empty bowl. This will yield 1 bowl of mushroom stew. However, you do not need mushrooms to make mushroom stew. You could just get it from a cow, a mushroom cow. Now, I know that I covered this in episode 2, titled Mushroom Island and Zombie Spores, but that was about 9 months ago, so I thought it was time for a refresher. The mushroom cows are very rare creatures, found on islands referred to as the mushroom fields biome. This is the rarest biome in the overworld. But if you find one of these mystical islands, then you are more than likely to find one of its strange inhabitants, the mushroom cow. Now, this is a very unique creature that gives more than milk. The mushroom cow can be sheared and mushrooms will drop from it. However, I don't recommend this unless you have multiple mushroom cows around, because once they are sheared, they can't be turned back to mushroom cows, and you will want to keep them. Because if you use an empty bowl on them, like a bucket for milk, then you will get mushroom stew from them. A mushroom cow can deliver an infinite amount of this stuff. You would never go hungry again. I wish you all the luck in the world finding one of these biomes. I have been on the search for almost 2 years in my world. Now that we have a very good understanding of mushroom stew, I would like to now take us to our next dish that I, Chef Dark Lord, cooked up for you. Suspicious stew. I think Suspicious Stew is probably the most recognized stew in the game of Minecraft, if not the most recognized food in the entire game of Minecraft, like out of all the foods. It has been used as a flavor for Pringles as one example. Trust me, I tried the Pringles Suspicious Stew flavor a couple years ago, and it was pretty good. Now, I will be the first to admit that I did not have much knowledge over Suspicious Stew prior to researching it. Upon researching it, I found it to be just simply fascinating. According to Minecraft.wiki, Suspicious Stew, quote, is a food item that can give the player a status effect that depends on the flour used to craft it, end quote. I never knew that. I thought that was just very cool. And it made me happy to see that flowers can be used in even more interesting ways. Allow me to tell you how to craft Suspicious Stew. It's quite simple, and you already know most of the recipe because it's exactly the same as mushroom stew. But then you add one of the 11 flowers used for special effects. Just add 1 brown mushroom plus 1 red mushroom plus 1 empty bowl and a small flower. I will tell you what those flowers are and what effects it has on the individual who eats it. Now, let's start with the allium flower. The allium flower, when added to this stew with the mushrooms, will produce a fire resistance effect. In Java Edition, that will last for 4 seconds, and in Bedrock, 2 seconds. Now, let's move on to the Azure Bleuet. That will cause blindness. And for Java, 8 seconds, Bedrock, 6 seconds. The next are 2 flowers that produce saturation for 0.3 seconds in Bedrock and 0.35 seconds in Java. That is Blue Orchid and Dandelion. Those will boost your saturation points. Moving on, Cornflower. That will give you a jump boost for 4 seconds in Bedrock, 6 seconds in Java. Next, Lily of the Valley, which will produce a poison effect, and that will last for 12 seconds in Java, 10 seconds in Bedrock. Oxide Daisy will produce a regenerative effect, and that will last 8 seconds in Java, 6 seconds Bedrock. Poppy and Torch Flowers will give you something that's really cool, night vision. And that will go on for 5 seconds for Java people, 4 seconds for Bedrock. And Bedrock, I haven't had night vision. I can't wait to do it. 4 seconds, gosh, that's not that long of a time. I wish they would have made that a little bit longer. I guess I'll just have to pack a bunch of that type Suspicious Stew. Going on to Tulips, that'll produce weakness and that's 9 seconds of weakness for Java and 7 seconds for Bedrock. Then the Wither Rose, which will give you a wither effect, and that'll last 8 seconds, and 8 seconds for Java and 6 seconds for Bedrock. Many of these are just very useful, and it has me asking myself, why haven't I used these before? I get so wrapped up in eating what I farm the most of, which is beef. Let's review them real quick, what I just read off. The fire resistance will make you immune to all fire types, including lava. Blindness will just blind you for the allotted amount of time that I just read off. Saturation will boost your saturation by 9.6 points. Jump boost will increase your jump base height by 50%. Poison effect is like the wither, but faster and will not kill you. It will leave you with 1 heart left. You'll be lingering to life. Good news. There is a quick cure for this by guzzling milk or honey when you are affected by this stew. This will cure your ailment instantly. Now, the next one is regeneration, which will regenerate your health. Then there's night vision, which is what it sounds like. This will allow you to see in the darkness and underwater. This would just be so beneficial. I'm so happy to know that this exists now. If you have an iron farm like I do, then you will be able to make a ton of suspicious stew with the night vision effect, because all it takes is the red poppy flowers or torch flowers. Now, the next effect, weakness, will literally just make you weak. It will reduce your melee damage, and your arms will hardly just be able to swing that sword. Then there's the wither effect, which will turn your health bar hearts all black, and they will wither away very slowly. They made them black so it'd be harder to see how low your health was, just like how it just dwindles closer to your death. It'll be hard for you to know how close you are to dying. The wither effect is similar to poison. It's just much slower, and this won't stop at 1 heart. It'll just kill you. So beware about putting wither rose in your mushroom stew. This is surely a stew for an enemy. But rest assured, this stew will only wither your health down by 4 health points per bowl. Same with the poison, I wanted to say. So make sure that your enemy has about 4 health points left when you give it to him. Otherwise, it might not work how you intend. If you're not close to any flowers or not able to locate any, don't worry. You can acquire suspicious stew in other ways. By scouring the overworld, looking for old ruins. Shipwrecks have a 54.3% chance of having suspicious stew on board in a chest. Ancient cities have a chance of 54.9% of having a range of 2 to 6 suspicious stews located in an ice chest. Or the desert well, which has a 12.5% chance of having suspicious stew. And these percentages are all based on Bedrock Edition. If looking for suspicious stew sounds tedious and perhaps a little taxing, then you can just pay for it the good old-fashioned way by trading emeralds with villagers, specifically with the farmer. Yes, these overworld agrarians know how to make a great vegetarian stew, a suspicious stew, but this cannot be a regular John Doe farmer. No. This must be an experienced farmer, an expert farmer, and even then, there is only a 17% chance of this mob selling this stew. However, the price seems somewhat reasonable if you do find one selling suspicious stew. 1 emerald for 1 bowl of suspicious stew. But before you start trading with Farmer Joe, I have a caveat. You will have no way of knowing what type of suspicious stew you are buying from them. The expert farmer may be selling you a kind, health regenerative, suspicious stew made with oxeye daisy flour. Or perhaps you had slighted this farmer in the past, and Farmer Joe instead sold you suspicious stew laced with wither rose, in hopes that you will die. What I'm trying to say here is that you will not know what the farmer sells you. But take mental note of that farmer's suspicious stew, because they will always make that type of suspicious stew every time. You could use name tags and label certain farmers in order to keep track of what stew they sell. Now, if you do not want to give up your well-earned emeralds, you have another option to obtaining suspicious stew. And this method is the most economical way of doing so. Which brings me back full circle to the mushroom cow. Yes, the mushroom cow can produce suspicious stew. Remember earlier when I told you how to obtain mushroom stew, sorry, look at me, tongue twisters and all. Mushroom stew from a mushroom cow, well, you will do the exact same thing, but you will feed the cow a flower first. One of the flowers that I had mentioned a moment ago, with the desired effect that you wish to deliver. But the suspicious stew cannot be made from a red mushroom cow. They can only be made by brown mushroom cows, which I had no clue existed until researching this episode. No, really, I have only seen red ones online and in my brother's world. So this caught me completely off guard. But apparently they exist, and you can get suspicious stew from them when milked with a bowl, and after feeding it a flower. You will have to feed it a flower every time after you fill your bowl up. If you don't, then it will just dispense out regular mushroom stew. I thought this was really just an interesting way of acquiring suspicious stew. But like I said, if you happen to have a brown mushroom cow, then this is the cheapest and easiest way to get it. A fun fact about suspicious stew, the developers added suspicious stew into Minecraft on April 23rd, 2019. This was part of the 1.14 update known as the Village and Pillage update. And the only reason that they added the suspicious stew to the game was to make a point. That the flower, lily of the valley, is poisonous. Isn't that funny? Way to make a point, Mojang. With that said, that is all I have over suspicious stew, folks. I hope that you learned as much as I did from all that. Perhaps you didn't. Maybe you're already stew aficionados. Well, hopefully you learned something about one of the other stews that I mentioned in this. With that said, that concludes our time in the realm for this week, my friends. Stew. What a unique food in Minecraft. I had no idea that there were so many uses to suspicious stew, and that flowers are used to depict what effect it will have on you, the player. I thought that was just a very clever idea by Mojang. Also, I did not realize that rabbit stew delivered so many hunger and saturation points. Just simply incredible. The history of real-world stew was incredibly intriguing as well. It does not surprise me that the French took that as their own and ran with it. I liked learning about the predecessors to the modern stew as well, in the few recipes that I read online, such as the Viking Stew and the Roman Capadia. Perhaps you are now inspired to attempt to recreate a medieval version of stew. Just find it on my Reddit and get to cooking, or just simply make your own in the Overworld. I wish you all happy crafting, and it was an absolute pleasure being your host. I will see you all next Tuesday at Realm News Flash, or next Thursday on a new episode of Realm News. The Dark Lord, signing out. Hello, Minecraftians. Thank you so much for listening to Realm News. It means the world to me that you enjoy the show that much that you tune in every week to hear how I put the real in Realm and expand your mind one block at a time. Well, if you really enjoy this podcast and want to express it further, then you can contribute by simply following the show by clicking that follow button, or write a review and rate the show, or do all three of those. I love the feedback, and that would help me get to my goal of 100 followers. You can even go a step further by making a monetary donation to support the show by going to bio.link/realmnews, all lowercase. Again, that's bio.link/realmnews. And click on that Ko-Fi button and buy me a coffee. You can donate as little as $1. The money really goes a long ways, folks, and it helps perpetuate the show. I have plans to create a whole website so Realm News can be more accessible and interactive with our amazing community that is amassing. Always appreciate, truly, and happy crafting.